Hello, we're here today to talk about a subject that gets me excited, historical photography. My name is Clayton Lewis, and I'm the curator of graphics material at the University of Michigan's William L. Clements Library. With me today are several special guests who share my enthusiasm for historical photography. Dave Tinder, known as the unparalleled collector of historical photography related to Michigan, and whose massive collection is being donated to the Clements Library. David Walters, also a noted collector and member of the Clements Library Associates Board of Directors, and the sponsor of the acquisition of the Tinder collection for the Clements. And Cynthia Motzenbecker, active collector and president of the Michigan Photographic Historical Society. So I'd like to start this conversation off with a question for Dave Tinder, and that is, why photography? You're not known to be a photographer yourself,
True.
But you've been driven over the last several decades to put together a collection of over 100,000 historical photos, some of which we're going to share today.
Right. It started in 1964 when Bill Darrah wrote a book called Stereo Views. Found that this photography with a third dimension put you at the scene and almost in the scene. Really caught my interest, and I started buying stereo views. 3 years later, I had 30,000 of them from all over the world.
You liked it.
From all over the world.
All over the world.
And at what point did you start focusing on Michigan as a special subject?
A friend of mine found several Detroit City directories from the 1870s, 1880s, and loaned them to me, and I was able to learn something about the photographers that had taken some of the Detroit stereo views. That aimed me for Michigan, so I began trading off my international collection of stereo views for Michigan stereo views, and then began acquiring more different formats of Michigan photography.
For our viewers, a stereo view is a 3D photograph, two similar images taken with a two-lens camera, and when viewed through a viewer, produces a startling 3D effect.
Right.
I grew up with ViewMaster slides in the old rotary format, which was basically the same thing. And it's interesting to me that in the digital age, stereo is now back in a big way.
Right.
Dave Walters, if I can ask you, you also are a collector of historical photography, but with a different focus than Dave Tinder. Well, what do you see as your specialty that's different from Dave's?
My interest in photography really progressed from an interest in history. And I'm interested in a period a little bit before what Dave concentrates on. Most of his views, stereos in particular, and smaller formats like a CDV, or these larger formats, these albumin photographs, are from about the middle of the 19th century to about the end of the 19th century. I actually am about 10 years earlier, and my interest is in daguerreotypes, which was the first commercially viable form of photography. And I think you have a daguerreotype here. And this is my favorite image in the Tinder collection. This is a dated 1849 photograph of a self-portrait of a photographer. And it's, in my mind, one of the seminal images of Michigan photography, and just a great thing. And when I saw it, I really got excited about it when Dave showed it to me, having the interest that I have in what we call hard images, which are basically pre-paper.
I've never seen an earlier image of a Michigan photographer in any format.
I think this may be the earliest identified photograph from the state of Michigan, and Dave could certainly expand on that thought.
And then Cindy, you two are a very active collector. I know that you and Dave Walters have elbowed each other aside at estate sales and flea markets around the state. What is your special interest in this?
I don't know. It's more of a rescue mission. I want to collect it all to keep it away from the garbage dumps. Plus, but I'm selective. I don't want every boring baby picture. I want nerd stuff, like technological things, guys working. So when I was out in the flea markets more, I would buy pictures and then go to work and show them to the plumbers and the skilled trades guys, and they would tell me what was going on in the photos. So that was always fun. It's always good to know the plumbers. They know the gossip.
So in your collection at the Clements Library, the vast majority are portrait photos. Like
That's correct. And,
probably 80% maybe or more are portrait photos. Is that typical of 19th century photography?
thing with the one thing about the CDV or card photograph was that some smart person or company introduced the family album, and a lot of card photographs were purchased to. These albums were had family pictures in them, but they also had personalities, theatrical people and politicians, so on.
Intermixed with the family photos.
They were produced in large quantities and filled a lot of different family albums. Cabinet photographs came along in the early 70s,
In the 1870s.
1870s.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were similar to the carte de visite, but bigger.
Same technology. Yeah, here's cabinet photograph of a photographic studio.
Have you seen this one? This is a fantastic picture. This is William Briley's studio,
Second studio.
second studio,
Yeah,
and with his sign, he's got his big skylight for the studio. There's a sample board out front for the public to view his wares, and I'm presuming this is his family
right.
posed in front. And I love the inscription up at the top that says, was it "Our Home in Flushing"?
Right.
So this is somebody in the family inscribed that photo.
That's his first studio.
There's his first studio. Not quite as lavish. Have you got any favorite photographers?
Well, I admire so many of them, but like Jex Bardwell was a Detroit photographer from the Civil War period up until almost 1900. And the Goodrich brothers, African-American photographers in Saginaw. William was in business from 1864 until 1919.
Mm-hmm. And they were very successful and
Yes.
commercially.
Prolific.
So your research into the activities of early Michigan photographers, you've compiled into an amazing directory, an amazing resource for historians and genealogists and enthusiasts about,
Right.
collectors about photography. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Started here early, but probably with no conception that it was going to be a 2,600-page directory.
How many working commercial photographers have you identified, Dave, just here in the state of Michigan?
I know the number of pages better than I know the number of photographers.
We had over
It was,
8,000.
I think,
Yeah.
over 8,000 from the 1840s into the 1920s.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for helping
It's
me
this
remember.
high.
One of the things we've discussed is how research has changed, and the internet has just made all the difference in the world.
You started by looking things up in city directories printed on paper,
Right.
scouring the list for the mention of a photographer.
And spent days and days in various libraries and centers looking at, going through page by page in Detroit city directories. That's like looking for anybody that called themselves a photographer or an artist or a retoucher. And them were the days, but
Now it's all.
Do you enjoy it more now that it's
Ancestry.
digital?
well, now that it's digital, things are can be highly organized, and you just go looking at the things that are very, very promising.
Mm-hmm.
Just the subject that you're interested in.
So we've got a selection of photographs here, and I know nothing gets us talking more than
Ooh,
having
yeah.
some great images in front of us. We talked a little bit about the different formats. I brought these from your collection, Dave, because we've got the same image from the same negative, but in a different format. The photograph taken of the ore docks at Marquette Harbor here also appears in a carte de visite format in this picture frame.
Right.
And you've commented about how radically it changes the presentation and the effect of the photograph, just the change in format. Other formats, of course, the large photographic prints from the negative. This one of this fabulous locomotive from the Fort Wayne Jackson and Southern Railroad, I believe that is, named for Grosvenor, who was he a state senator? I can't remember, but he was a politician who maybe had something to do with the financing of the railroad,
Right.
and got a locomotive named after him. But Dave's collecting interests has included the photographs themselves, but also some objects related to photos. Can you tell us about this fascinating object?
You just told me what the name you'd found for this, the Tommy.
Yeah, Sticking Tommy. A friend of mine, a collector, mentioned that was what those were commonly known as.
Now these were used in the iron mines and copper mines. They could poke this into the wall or hang it over anything. This held a candle here, and you often see these they're all wearing these in their hats.
The woman I spoke to that identified that was a weaver, and she says, "Oh, it was common for women in domestic interiors at night when they were sewing, that they would hang it from a chair to light their work."
Right.
But
Clayton, you asked me once if I'd had any surprises
yeah,
in my collecting. Well, I can say this. After 50 years, I'm still finding enough desirable Michigan photos to stay broke.
Yeah.
And I'm also still finding out about photographers that I never heard of before. Just a week ago today, I bought a cabinet photograph by a photographer, Michigan photographer, I'd never heard of before. So they're still coming out of the woodwork.
That's a rare day.
Yeah.
I know one of the most fun I've had with Dave is trying to find those exact rare photographs that he doesn't have already cataloged. And the nearest I ever got was I found a CDV where he had one other example. So I'm not there yet, but it is going to be sometime in my life I'm going to find something that isn't in the Tinder collection. But it's been a hard struggle.
one of the things I appreciate about the collection, Dave, is your eye for things that have meaning that maybe somebody else would pass by. And so I brought a selection of photos from your Wayne County collection, and these are photographic souvenirs from Detroit nightclubs. And this is the kind of thing where they were so commonplace in their day in the middle of the 20th century, they're probably thrown away.
Right.
But every now and then you come across one of these. They would have usually the advertisement on the front for the club, and then these would have been taken probably by a commercial photographer that went table to table and took pictures of the clientele.
You had to have a darkroom in the back. And he had to process them and dry them in order to sell them to the people while they were still there.
Is that how they did it?
Yeah.
That was going to be my
Yeah,
next
the more you
question.
drink, the more you buy.
But these are also great documentation for a scene in Detroit that's now gone. A lot of these were in the Black Bottom district that is now I-75, essentially, through Detroit. But there's at least a couple of dozen of these in the collection, and and any one of them is interesting. But when you have a large group of them, the value of them multiplies, and they begin to expand in meaning.
Dave, we were talking earlier, and we're all collectors to some degree, not maybe to your level, but we talked about collecting being a treasure hunt. And I think maybe the viewers would be interested in hearing about some of the treasures that you've acquired and how you've acquired them. And a collector friend of mine used to call that a good day. Mm-hmm. When you get something that's not necessarily valuable, although it may be, but something that really is meaningful to you. Can you tell us maybe about a good day that you've had?
Offhand, I'd say it's been a while since I had a really good day. But I mentioned earlier picking up this cabinet photograph by a photographer I'd never heard of. Michigan photographer I'd never heard of. And
which I can tell everybody is a very rare and difficult thing.
Yeah, 8,000
From personal
plus.
experience.
Yeah.
and I got that home and with quite a batch of photographs and didn't realize what I had until I was looking things over at home. And I keep the photos in alphabetical order by a photographer, and there was one.
And how many, just to give people a sense of how vast this collection is and how extensive, how many years had it been since you had that kind of a discovery?
Happens more often than you might think.
Really?
Yeah. My friend Randy Gladstone has been coming up with things from his collection. He and I were doing pretty much the same kind of research and collecting for many years. Just the last few years, we've gotten together and are cooperating, and he's going to be my follow-up.
So what you're saying is that 2,600-page directory is going to get larger.
That's right. No, it's probably going to double in size. 2,600 pages is all text.
Have you got a favorite single photograph in your collection that you can recall? If there's one that jumps out.
Well, I have to go along with Dave that the daguerreotype
Of Mr. Hogue?
Mr. Hogue is,
Oh, with the
Right.
writing on the bottom.
yeah.
I want to just clean that big shviki on it.
It's a technical term, right?
Yeah, technical term.
Dave, have you ever seen another daguerreotype with the lettering at the bottom like that?
No, I've seen photographers who've done self-portraits and then have etched their name into the plate.
Yeah.
But I've never seen anybody holding a signboard or who, this was probably a double exposure,
Right.
like a magic background where he first took the sign and reversed it with a prism. So he was
Right.
obviously sophisticated enough
Right.
to do that. And then he inserted himself above the sign and re-exposed the plate. So it's a double exposure
Right.
in order to get that effect.
Yeah, because there'd be 2 points of focus.
Correct.
Well, I could talk all day with you folks about this, but I think we might need to wrap it up unless there's something else that you'd like to mention that we've forgotten. I'm sure we'll be thinking of plenty in the car home. But
Just make sure you label your family photos and don't throw them out, give them to somebody. Don't throw them in the garbage if you don't want them.
I think something we talked about earlier when we got together, it's really an extraordinary level of cooperation that got the Tinder collection to the Clements Library in the University of Michigan. And it wouldn't have been possible without Dave, whose goal when I first met him was to keep the collection together and make it available. And so many collectors want to just hide things and put them in a vault. But Dave wanted to make his collection available to future generations, not only his friends and colleagues today, but to future generations. And it took a lot of effort on Dave's part and on others, particularly the Clements, to make that happen. And I think the resource of more than 125,000 Michigan photographs here at the University of Michigan is a fantastic one for posterity.
I'll have to mention, for those of you that are interested in the Tinder collection and would like to know more, I would suggest going to the Clements Library's website, clements.umich.edu, and look for the search feature and search for the David V. Tinder Collection of Michigan Photography, and you'll find the finding aids that will begin your exploration of the collection. Also on our website is the research of Dave Tinder. His Directory of Early Michigan Photographers is a free download in PDF format on the Clements Library website, and we appreciate, all of us, your willingness to make that colossal research available free and easy for anyone to use. And I'd certainly like to thank our friends at WOLV TV who have agreed to film this interview and this conversation that otherwise we would not have record of. This is the kind of thing that we've talked about, this stuff at the library and at your place over the years many times, but it's nice to have some of this recorded for others to enjoy as well. So, and of course, thank you Cindy and Dave for coming out and agreeing to do this.
Well, I'd like to thank Dave for his part in putting this together, this arrangement where my collection is going to the Clements Library. Couldn't have done it without him.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.